Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a minute. Okay. Hi. Good evening, everybody. My name is Elisa Teles-Munoz, and I'm the K-12 Programming Manager at Climate Mental Health Network. Thank you for attending today's webinar, and we're excited to get started. So let's go over today's agenda. So we will begin with a brief overview of webinar guidelines, followed by introductions to the organizations that are presenting today. Sarah Espinosa, the CEO of the National Environmental Education Foundation, will introduce NEEF, and Climate Mental Health Network's founder and executive director, Sarah Newman, will introduce Climate Mental Health Network. Then you will hear an overview of the project and its process, after which we'll delve into the research study conducted with middle school teachers across the United States, followed by the first very brief Q&A. Then we'll shift gears to publicly share for the first time ever our empirically informed Climate Emotions Toolkit for educators and the pilot program that we led to pilot these resources in classrooms across the country. Then we'll wrap up with a final 15-minute Q&A and closing remarks, and we'll give you the opportunity to get your toolkit, to download it, and next steps. Next slide, please. So here are some webinar guidelines for today. As a reminder, we are recording. First, to ask questions to our presenters, please use the Q&A function. There will be two opportunities for the respective presenters to respond. The first brief Q&A will be after the research presentation, and the second longer Q&A will be after the presentation on the toolkit itself. We have turned off the chat to minimize distractions, and you can turn on captions by clicking on the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, the recording and all links will be sent to registrants in the follow-up email. Now I'll hand it over to Sarah Espinosa from NEEF.
Thank you, Elisa. I just want to take a minute to introduce NEEF, the National Environmental Education Foundation. NEEF was chartered by Congress through the National Environmental Education Act in 1990. We're a nonpartisan and non-advocacy organization that is charged with uniting public and private resources for impactful environmental education and engagement across the United States. Our mission is to make the environment more accessible, relevant, and connected to people's daily lives. And we do our work across three main program focus areas: K-12 education, health, and conservation. We're particularly excited about the partnership with Climate Mental Health Network and the work that we're sharing today, which has been years in the making. This was a really incredible opportunity for NEEF and the Climate Mental Health Network to marry together our areas of expertise. Their focus and expertise in climate change and mental health, and our expertise in youth engagement and education, and really designing high quality learning materials for young people. So with that, I will pass it over to Sarah Newman to introduce you all to the Climate Mental Health Network. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Espinosa. The Climate Mental Health Network is a collective of dedicated community advocates focused on fostering mental well-being by reshaping our national dialogue and actions about the emotional impacts of climate change. And we do that by focusing on three primary demographics. That includes educators, youth, and parents and caregivers. And I also just wanted to thank NEEF for this incredible partnership and collaboration over several years through research and developing this exciting toolkit. So thank you to NEEF for your partnership as well. And I'd also like to thank our funders who have made this whole program over a couple of years possible. And that is the Robert H. N. Ho Family Foundation Global, as well as support from Blue Shield of California. And lastly, we want to extend a special thank you to all of the teachers who participated in this work. We could not have done any of this without you. So thank you so much to all of the teachers. And now I'm going to turn it over to another Sarah, Sarah Blount, who's the Program Director of Research and Evaluation at NEEF. And she's going to speak for a few minutes, and then you will hear from Larissa Dooley, who is the Director of Research and Programs at the Climate Mental Health Network. And then finally, Megan Willig will present, and she is the Program Manager of Environmental Education at NEEF. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah Newman. So I'll be sharing a high-level summary of the work with everyone. So first is the need. Youth mental health is suffering from the impacts of climate change. Research has shown that youth are affected by the negative psychological effects of climate change. While they're impacted by it, they often lack the ability to limit its harm. This can lead to emotions such as anxiety, sadness, and helplessness. We felt there was an opportunity to address this need in classroom settings. In particular, middle school is a setting in which students are becoming more aware of what's going on in the world in general, and with the issue of climate change in particular, as classrooms begin formal instruction on the topic. It's also a developmentally formative period, and so we saw middle school as an important potential point of intervention. However, there's a challenge that lays in that while educators can be a key source of emotional support for their students, some may feel that they lack the resources, tools, or training to offer this support in the context of climate change. Our proposed solution to this challenge was to develop an educator-informed and tested classroom resource for effectively supporting not only student, but also teacher emotions related to climate change, helping them to build resiliency and empower them towards action. In order to develop the resources that would meet the needs of both the educators and the students, we wanted to learn from teachers about how climate change emotions show up in the classroom and what ways would be the most effective to equip teachers to better support not only those student climate emotions, but also the climate emotions that were coming up with the educators themselves. To do this, we engaged in a multi-year program of work. First, we started by surveying teachers and then conducting focus groups with smaller groups of these educators to try and get answers to these questions. Based on the results of this research, we then drafted a toolkit that would offer context for educators on the climate science and the psychological factors that can influence emotions around climate change. It also included a set of classroom resources aligned with science standards for educators to use with their students to explore these concepts. The prototype was reviewed and refined with the feedback of classroom educators and then piloted with classrooms across the country. Today, we're pleased to share the final toolkit with all of you. Now I will hand it over to Larissa from the Climate Mental Health Network.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hi, I'm Larissa Dooley, and I'm the Director of Research and Programs at Climate Mental Health Network. I'm here to tell you about a study that we conducted with middle school teachers across the United States. We had multiple aims with this study. We wanted to know what emotional responses teachers are encountering in their students related to climate change. We know from prior research that young people are distressed about climate change, but we wanted to understand how this shows up in the classroom. Second, we wanted to understand the emotional impacts of climate change on teachers. This was important to us because we care about teachers, but also because we suspected that it would be important to help teachers cope with their own distress about climate change before. Just as on an airplane, when an adult must put on their own, need some support for their own climate emotions before they could effectively support students' emotions. Third, we wanted to understand what teachers might need in terms in the classroom. resources to support student and teacher mental health in the context of climate change. Next slide. So we conducted a research study which consisted of a survey and focus groups. Data collection occurred in 2023. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, great.
Okay, thanks. Our sample was 63 public middle school teachers from across the United States, and 32 of these teachers also participated in one of our focus group sessions to gather additional data on their experiences, needs, and preferences. To be eligible for the study, our key criteria were that teachers had to speak English, be currently teaching middle school students, and be teaching at a public school. Our sample included teachers from 29 states, including teachers from the South, from states like Texas or Oklahoma, the Northeast, including New York and Pennsylvania, the Midwest, states like Missouri and Wisconsin, and from the Western region, California and Arizona, for example. This is a quick snapshot of the demographics of our sample. We had a majority female teachers, which is representative of the gender distribution of public school teachers in the US broadly. 77% of public school teachers in the US are female, according to the National Center for Education Statistics. Distributed across various age ranges, and our teachers, oh, sorry, I guess there's some problems with, can you hear me now? Okay. And there are some, okay. Our sample was pretty well distributed across various age ranges, and our teachers worked in schools in suburban, urban, and rural areas. And our sample had a wide range of teaching experience. Next slide. Our teachers primarily taught science, but we also had teachers who taught across other subjects, including math, language arts, health, among other subjects. Okay, so what did we find? Well, we asked teachers about their concerns about climate change, and we found out that more than 3/4, next slide, more than 3/4 of teachers considered climate change a very serious problem. Additionally, 20.6% considered it a somewhat serious problem. In fact, only one teacher in our sample thought it was not a problem. Additionally, most teachers were concerned that climate change would impact their mental health. So a combined 64% of teachers were either very or somewhat concerned that it would impact their mental health in a negative way. Only 7.9% of teachers said that they were not at all concerned. Additionally, teachers, a combined 83%, were either very or somewhat concerned that climate change would harm the mental health and well-being of their students. So between this very and somewhat concerned, 83% were concerned that it would harm their students' mental health and well-being. We then asked teachers if they'd been directly impacted by climate change. Indeed, 71% of teachers said that they had been directly impacted by an extreme weather event, such as a major flood, hurricane, tornado, fire, heat wave, or drought. And this is aligned with recent polls showing that approximately 70% of US adults have been impacted by extreme weather in the past year. When we asked them to think about the extreme weather events that had impacted them and which extreme weather, many teachers reported being most impacted by a hurricane, such as Hurricanes Florence and Sandy, wildfires, and/or tornadoes. Teachers also reported experiencing flooding, extreme and unusual temperatures, including heat waves and freezing temperatures in areas where this is uncommon, droughts and blizzards. To illustrate some of the direct impacts of climate change that some of the teachers in our sample described, here are a few quotes from the teachers. A teacher who had gone through Hurricane Florence in 2018 said, "My husband, 3 pets, and I had to evacuate. As a homeowner, that process was scary. It was terrifying watching what was happening to my city on the news. We were absolutely helpless. Trying to return, there was flooding everywhere, and the roads were closed. It was one of the scariest experiences of my life." Another teacher who had gone through a hurricane and subsequent flooding said, "I had nowhere to live for 5 months, and my school was also destroyed. So it was a dramatic change to every aspect of my life." Another teacher who had been in an area near a wildfire said, "I couldn't open windows or go outside for long periods of time. I got terrible headaches. I couldn't see the mountains or explore them like I love to do." So overall, we were seeing, a lot of fear and anxiety, direct impacts such as having, their housing, losing housing, their school being lost, as well as physical health impacts like the headaches and disruption in normal activities and ability to enjoy the activities that they normally enjoy, like hiking and connecting with nature and being able to even just go outside. We asked them what kinds of emotions came up for them related to these extreme weather events, and teachers most frequently endorsed feeling worry, anxiety, and fear related to the disaster that they had experienced. They also commonly experienced helplessness, frustration, overwhelm, sadness, and anger. We also asked them if, to the best of their knowledge, their students had been impacted by an extreme weather event. And more than 3/4 of teachers, 76%, indicated that their students had indeed been directly impacted by an extreme weather event. Students had experienced, according to teachers, flooding, Here are some quotes from teachers about how their students had been impacted. One teacher whose students had been impacted by Hurricane Florence said, "My students were displaced. Some of them lost their homes. Some of my students didn't have food. It was heartbreaking to watch." Another whose students had been impacted by Hurricane Ian said, "Many students lost educational time, at least a month." And another teacher whose students had gone through an intense heat wave said, "They were lethargic, could not focus, and melting emotionally." So you can see that there, again, are large disruptions from losing their home and basic, access to basic needs like food and shelter, to losing educational time and access to learning and school environment, as well as just being, and their focus being interrupted and having kind of emotional impacts from the disaster. Teachers most often said that students who had been directly impacted by an extreme weather event expressed worry, anxiety, and fear related to the disaster. Other commonly observed emotions in students were overwhelm, as well as sadness, helplessness, and frustration. In addition to wanting to know about the mental health impacts of climate disasters, we also wanted to know about what we refer to as the indirect impacts of climate change on the mental health and well-being of students and teachers. There's a wealth of research that shows that just being aware of the massive problem of climate change and the havoc that it's wreaking across the globe can cause profound distress and anxiety. So we wanted to know about climate change. And we found that indeed, next slide, 82% of teachers said that they experience worry when they teach about climate change. Additionally, 71% of teachers said their students express worry when learning about climate change. We also asked teachers what they might need in order to best support student mental health and well-being in the context of climate change, as well as to support their own mental health and well-being. Most teachers, 69.4%, said that the resources that they use to teach climate change do not include information currently on how teachers should respond to students' climate emotions. About a quarter of teachers, 23%, said that their resources somewhat provide this information, and only about 7% said that their resources definitely do provide this information. So this suggested to us that teachers need more information and guidance so that when they're teaching about climate change, they know how to handle the emotions that may arise in the classroom. Along and support they need to effectively support student climate emotions. This suggests that, again, educators feel unprepared to deal with student climate emotions and need more resources and support in order to support their students effectively. On the next slide, there's some quotes illustrating these needs. A middle school earth science teacher said, "I know climate change will impact the generation I teach the most, but I do not have the resources or knowledge to address how to inform them of the severity of the impact climate change will have on them without overwhelming them with that burden." So that, and this is something we heard again and again, teachers want to know, how do I tell them the truth about what's going on and the severity of the problem without also kind of traumatizing them and scaring them away? We have a wide array of emotions that are caused by climate change, and I would like to know how to adequately handle those emotions. So again, demonstrating that there's a gap and there was a need for these resources. So we identified at this point a need for resources, but we also wanted teachers to provide input on what these resources should be. What resources would be most helpful to them? We wanted to involve teachers in the conception of and design of these resources. So we asked for their input, ideas, and suggestions. And what we heard was very valuable. First, teachers recommended that any resources created should be easy for teachers to use and implement without much preparation or legwork, as well as easy to modify for different types of learners and abilities, and reproducible so that it can be scaled for school-wide use and beyond. Teachers also said, please keep it brief. They are short, so they recommended that resources should be short and snappy. Teachers also suggested that resources should be tied in with existing curricula and standards, such as science and social emotional learning standards. And teachers finally emphasized a need for resources tailored specifically to middle school students, which are accessible and appropriate for that grade range. We often heard teachers saying, you know, I have resources to teach about climate change and to deal with maybe to deal with the emotions for high school or older kids, but not for this grade level specifically. Teachers also had some format and content recommendations that we thought was interesting. They wanted to hear case studies. They said that case studies, particularly videos or short articles, were particularly impactful for students. You know, for example, case studies of students expressing their emotions and how they could channel those emotions into action. And they also emphasized that peer-to-peer communication was most effective for students, and that they often wanted to hear from their peers more than they wanted to hear from other adults or teachers. So they said that, you know, short videos, for example, would be effective. And then they also suggested that we include action ideas and solutions, and also that trainings for teachers on how to support and address student climate emotions would be valuable for them. So in summary, teachers and students experience negative emotional impacts due to climate change. We also found that teachers feel unprepared to support students in managing their emotions. And teachers recommended that new resources should be easy to implement, age appropriate, and aligned with standards. And we use these findings together to inform the development of the Climate Emotions Toolkit for educators, which my colleague Megan is going to introduce in just a few minutes. Okay, and I'll pass it to Elisa to open it up for questions for a brief Q&A.
Thanks, Larissa. And this is just a reminder for folks to continue submitting questions using the Q&A function. Okay, so for the first question, and just some preface is earlier in the presentation, Sarah Blount talked a bit about why middle school is a key age group. So Larissa, could you please share a little bit more about why you focused on middle school specifically?
Yeah, so over the past few years, some large-scale studies have come out showing that young people, and these are specifically focused on mostly young adults, are extremely profoundly distressed about climate change. For example, a study that came out last year from Eric Lewandowski's group found that it was a study in 16,000 young people ages 18 to 25 across the US, across all 50 states, and across all different kinds of social political contexts, found that I believe it was 85% or approximately of young people are very worried about climate change, and that 38% of those young people are experiencing extremely strong impacts so that it's actually affecting their daily life and functioning. So it's interfering, for example, in their ability to sleep or eat or pursue their goals or have normal relationships. So that's a really significant finding to show that 38% of young people in this country are so distressed about climate change that it's actually impacting their life, their daily life. And so our thinking really was, knowing this, how do we kind of support young people before they get to that point? Of course, we can't eradicate negative feelings about climate change. We wouldn't want to, because it's, those feelings are natural and warranted, and they also can be quite motivating and motivate people to action. But we also want young people to be able to enjoy their lives and to be able to function normally and be able to sleep and eat and enjoy life. And so we started to really think about how do we prevent those types of really profound mental health impacts. And so we wanted to start earlier with young people and kind of get them before they get to that stage. And so middle school, as Sarah B mentioned, is really the point in which young people are starting to really become aware of climate change in a new way. It's the grade in which young people are most often exposed to formal education about climate change for the first time, and also because of their exposure to the media and technology, they're just becoming more aware of what's going on in the world broadly. And it's also a very developmentally formative at this critical stage felt very important. And so that was why we aim to focus as a starting point on middle school.
Thank you. And another question that we got in the chat for both Sarah and Larissa: did the survey include language of more positive emotions regarding hope, resilience, adaptation?
Yes, it did. And we did find that teachers, for example, I'm not sure if it's actually on, let me see if it's on the slide, but we did have, you know, levels of, you know, fairly high levels of curiosity, for example, and some motivation and inspiration. You know, those definitely came through as well. But the top, you know, 6 emotions for both teachers and students were negative emotions, worry, anxiety, fear, helplessness, frustration. So we did assess for positive emotions as well, but they just were not as widely endorsed as the negative ones.
And this will be the final question for this Q&A section. And then, as I explained earlier, we'll have a longer Q&A section at the end of the presentation. So the question is, are these findings in line with other studies on the impacts of climate change on youth mental health?
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, the largest study in this area to date is the study that I mentioned by Eric Lewandowski and his colleagues. That was 16,000 young people across the US. That is the largest study of its kind. And they showed, as I said, I think it was 85%. I can check that number, but let me see. Elise is nodding that 85%, yes, that's 85% of youth are worried about climate change. So it's very, you know, much aligned with our findings that, you know, in the 70-80 percentile, we saw concern, worry, and negative, you know, challenging emotions related to climate change in the students and the teachers.
Sarah, do you have anything to add to any of those questions? You want to open the floor? Oh, I can't hear you on your end.
Perfect. That's perfect and intentional. I was just going to say that Larissa knows her stuff. I'm seeing some questions about sort of some of the deeper details about the study, the number of folks participating, the spread of the state, and more details about the positive emotional data. And I just want to let everyone know that the answers to some of the more granular pieces of it will be available in all of the materials that we'll share at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this point, that'll be the end of this first Q&A session. And like I said, please continue using the Q&A function throughout the presentation, and then we'll ask some more for our presenters at the end. So I'll now hand it off to my colleague, Megan Willig.
Thank you, Elisa. Good evening, everyone. I'm very delighted to be joining all of you this evening. And in this next section, we're going to now take a closer look at the resources themselves. So just to situate us from the research that Larissa just described, that was our first phase and really wanted to get the teacher input from the onset. But also throughout this whole entire process, we wanted teacher feedback. We wanted to know that this was going to be useful. That was our goal here. So we took all that feedback, the needs that Larissa discussed and identified, and our teams on Climate Mental Health Network and at NEEF began drafting what we'll present to you here shortly. And we were trying to address the teacher needs, helping support teachers support their students, helping support teachers with their own climate emotions, and helping students cope with the climate emotions and gain resiliency there. So our process here was we drafted the initial toolkit. We got feedback early on in that process from a smaller group of teachers, went through another round of revisions, and then we piloted the resources nationwide with 40 public middle school teachers. So that brings us up to the resources that later on this evening, very soon, you will be able to download. So just to give you a high level, and then we'll dive in, is there's 2 documents that we developed. The first is an educator guide. And the educator guide is really to help address the confidence and capability of educators to know how to begin addressing this topic that may be new, and maybe, they might feel a little nervous about taking on for the first time. So in this document, we kind of go over how to incorporate this into climate change instruction. What are some effective and positive teaching approaches? We have resources like the Climate Emotions Wheel, which we'll look at a little bit later on as well, and connecting these practices to things teachers may already be doing, like social emotional learning. And then there's a second document, and this document has meditations for teachers, which we'll look at a little more closely, again, very shortly. And then there's 10 student activities that are ready to use in the classroom. So this is what we piloted in a nationwide pilot, and will be free to download today. So our pilot was addressing climate emotions in schools. And I'll show you here in a moment a picture of, here you go. You can take a look and see that we had 40 public middle school teachers pilot these resources with their students in fall of 2024. And they were representing 25 states across the United States. You can see those ones highlighted in blue here. And they were representing a mix of suburban, urban, and rural types of school settings. So our goal in this pilot was to have teachers test these out and provide us with feedback of, evaluate these tools. Are they reaching our goals of helping teachers and students cope with the emotional impacts of climate change? And then second, are they helping promote emotional resilience in the context of climate change and education? So I can give you a little bit of showing the impact here that yes, we were delighted to get the feedback from the teachers participating that yes, they found these resources very useful in a variety of ways. So first of all, after piloting the resources with their students, they reported feeling more confident and more equipped to address climate-related emotions. So 2 that I'll call out here are that after using the resources, 77% felt confident and equipped to address student emotions, as compared to a baseline of 17 and 10% respectively. So they work. That's one of the takeaways from the pilot. And I'll give you some more of the impact there as we go through these, but I'm going to go ahead and transition into describing each of these in more detail. And the goal of this section here is that for those of you listening in, when you download these, you'll know how they can be used, how they can be integrated into approaches and curricula that's already out there, who might be a really good audience for these, and share them. So there's 3 components of these free resources: the educator's guide, the meditations, and the student activities. So we'll take a look at each one. So the first one is the educator's guide to navigating climate emotions. And so this document is really designed to speak directly to middle school educators in a way that they can digest and use this as a guide as they're preparing to teach about climate emotions and during a unit on climate change. And kind of to frame all of this. So to give them some background information about, perhaps climate emotions is a new phrase for them. To know, what does that mean? What does it encompass? There's information in this guide about the physical and mental health impacts of climate change on youth. So there's data and statistics from the literature that they can use to situate all of this in the larger context. Then there's some very practical tools for understanding climate emotions. So one example is using identity maps. Another is the Climate Mental Health Network's Climate Emotions Wheel. Woven into this resource, because our teams on Climate Mental Health Network and NEEF have experts in psychology and education. Several of us are former classroom teachers. So woven in are strategies that teachers can use. There's information about the neurobiology of climate emotions. And we got feedback that, this neuroscience and neurobiology being integrated into all of the resources was really fascinating. And, our hope is that it helps having teachers and students understand, what is the brain doing when learning about all of this, how to then teach climate change in an age and developmentally appropriate way. We have some guidance in this section for channeling student anxiety into action. I saw there was a question coming in about, having students make change in their communities. And we weave this in that one of the goals is coping and navigating emotions that are all valid in response to learning about climate change. But using those and thinking about that of how can they be connected to positive solutions. And throughout this resource, we are kind of building bridges for teachers. So again, making connections to things they may already be doing in the classroom. A little bit more about what someone can expect when going through this section of the toolkit. It's easily navigable. So each of these topics are fairly brief so that, over the course of reading through this, a teacher is able to learn quite a lot. And it's written, again, specifically for them. It has strategies and tips from experts in the field woven throughout, again. And we really view this as a great starting place, somewhere that teachers can go, get the context, learn, be prepared, and then that they can even use throughout that unit. So what were teachers sharing with us about their experience when they piloted it? Well, 100% said they would recommend the toolkit to a colleague. 90% found the toolkit very easy to understand, and 95% found the toolkit valuable. We have a video here from one of the teachers in the pilot, and here's her take on this resource.
But we really need this extra support for teachers and students to support their mental and emotional well-being. And this was the toolkit was an incredible resource to just quickly and easily go to one place to help bring medicine to my students in our classroom. But
Another teacher shared all of these relatable, real-life, straightforward answers to the many student questions surrounding climate change is going to be so helpful as a teacher trying to meet my students where they are. Get them to understand the scientific facts, and then also believe and act in a way which helps to create climate solutions. Another teacher shared, I like that there are short segments on a variety of topics in the toolkit. This formatting not only feels accessible to me as an educator, but is something that I can consume in the limited amount of time I have when integrating information that may be outside my typical lessons. And I think that reflects that we were very cognizant of the time constraints in teaching settings. So trying to have all of the resources be easily digestible. I'm going to give you one example here of a topic that we cover in the educator guide, just to give a little bit more of flavor to what you can expect in this resource. So one concept that we introduce in the educator's guide, and you'll see come back up in the student activities, is the concept of negativity bias. And in this section, what we discuss is that doom and gloom approaches can leave students feeling overwhelmed with negative emotions. And this is related to the concept that our brains are hardwired to attend to negative information much more than positive information. So a strategy that teachers can adopt and keep this in mind is that when discussing climate change, they can maintain a ratio of bad news to good news of 1 to 3 or higher. And doing this is helping their students cope with, they're going to attend to that piece of bad news a lot more than the good. And so this is actionable for for teachers right away. And then in the toolkit, we also provide suggestions on where a teacher can go to find some good climate news. All right, so switching gears a little bit, we're going to look at the second component of the toolkit. So this is reflective practices to help teachers manage climate-related stress. And what you can find in the second document with the student activities are 4 mindful meditation videos created specifically for climate educators. So we had heard from teachers that they wanted support when they were teaching climate emotions with their students. But their feedback was also revealing in the phase 1 research that they themselves were encountering climate emotions such as worry, such as anxiety. And so we wanted to address that piece. We wanted to help teachers feel ready to take this on. So we worked with climate psychologist Leslie Davenport to create 4 new, unique mindfulness meditation videos for teachers specifically, who could use them before teaching about climate emotions. So we, suggest using these in the days leading up to the lesson, even the day of. The 4 videos are either 5 or 10 minutes in length each, and they are unique and stand apart from a general meditation video, which also can be very useful. But the unique piece here is that in the videos, the audience is intended to be a teacher in this exact same setting. So it can help a teacher feel less alone, that they're in community, that they're more grounded, they can be more calm and centered prior to taking this on with their students. And the teachers piloted these in the pilot, and 82% found the meditations to be valuable. I have another feedback from a teacher here who shared, "This meditation enhanced my focus and concentration, allowing me to think clearly and eliminate the distractions around me. The completion of this activity fostered a sense of calm that enabled me to face a challenge immediately after more effectively." So we loved hearing feedback like this from teachers who felt that these videos were helping equip them to take this work on. And finally, the third component of the toolkit, the free toolkit that we'll share with you very shortly, are 10 flexible student activities. And we were hearing from teachers that in addition to information that helped them understand this concept more, they wanted activities and resources that were ready to use. So this set of student activities is for middle school teachers, and it can be used to supplement the curriculum that they're teaching already in the classroom. We do make connections to the next generation science standards. There are social emotional learning standards embedded as well. And there are 4 teachers in any subject area. There are a variety of topics included here. So while there are those explicit connections to the NGSS, there are also many opportunities for these to be used in any subject area. Each activity in the toolkit includes a lesson plan for educators and a ready-to-use student handout that students could write directly on. Based on the need identified in phase 1, that teachers wanted these to be brief, the average length of time that these we estimate to take and that the teachers who piloted them endorsed is right around 15 to 20 minutes. 1 or 2 could be done a little bit more quickly, maybe like a 10-minute activity, and there's one that's a little bit longer, 45 to 60 minutes. But again, most of these are 15 to 20 minutes in duration so that teachers can use them whenever they fit. So at the beginning of a lesson, at the end, They have a block period in the middle, so it's adaptable and flexible to a variety of settings. And of course, could be done, there's extensions. So even within that, there's some flexibility. So a little bit more on how to use the student activities. We included varied types of activities in here to meet a variety of settings and a variety of learners, variety of subject areas. So many of the student activities incorporate reflection, and students are reflecting on their own emotions. At least one incorporates art and art around climate change. Several are interactive, where the class is up and moving and sharing together. And then several incorporate those multimedia components that Larissa shared teachers had identified as something that they wanted to see was their students getting to hear from other youth talking about climate emotions. So several incorporate that. They can be done in any order. So the 10 activities each could be done as a standalone activity. They could also be paired together in any order where they fit best. And they're designed for students in grades 5 through 8. Some feedback we got. One teacher shared, "We had a super positive experience with this lesson. They were so empowered and connecting with each other over positive feelings about nature and caring for nature. It was quite empowering." And the respondents also shared, so each teacher reviewed each activity as they did it. So across all of the responses, 99% indicated student engagement with the activity. 97% indicated that they would use the activity again, and 97% of the teacher respondents indicated that they would recommend the activity. And we're really excited about all of these pieces and student engagement, speaking to that the students themselves were having, getting something out of these and having a positive experience together as a class. We heard from teachers that in many cases these opened up new conversations and allowed the classes to feel more connected with each other as well. So when you download these and access the toolkit, the educator lesson plan itself that goes with each activity will include instructions and context, a materials list, the time that the activity is estimated to take, learning targets, accommodations that teachers can make, and extension ideas for if the class wants to go further or there's a group of students who want to go further with that activity. And here is feedback from one of the teachers who piloted these activities.
The other activity that we chose to do was the environmental identity timeline. And this was just very interesting to see the connection that students feel to the environment. And everyone was very different. I have some students who are living on farms that are working farms. I have others who camp regularly with their families. I have others who have only been to the beach one time or have never seen the mountains of North Carolina, even though they're 2 hours away from us. And so everyone sees and finds their place in the environment differently. And just to see those varying experiences, I think was very valuable for my students. And it allowed them to see, hey, we're all a part of this beautiful world that we live in, but in very different ways. And I think it made some of my students a little bit more curious of, hey, I want to get out there and do some of these things. I want to learn how to grow food. And while some of them may not be as attainable for others, if one student had a bee farm, maybe everyone's not going to have a beehive at their house, but we can appreciate that we're all working interconnectedly with the environment and we all have a place in it. And while we have a lot of students nowadays who would rather choose to be indoors and on their computers and playing video games and on their phones, we still have a desire to be connected to the natural outdoor world. And this activity just really allowed us to see that, hey, we all have a place, we all fit, it all looks different, and we have different experiences. But we all could agree at the end of it, is the environment important? And absolutely so, without any measurable amount. It is the most important, possibly, we can say.
Great to hear Brittany reflect there on the student curiosity and engagement as they went through these. So I'm going to go ahead and preview one of the activities again, just to give even more of what you can expect when you're looking at these activities. So the one that we're going to look at together in a little more detail right now is activity 1. It's called Teflon and Velcro, the brain's negativity bias. And this was the topic we discussed in the educator guide a little earlier. And so you can see here that this is where teachers could share and introduce this concept to their students and provide them with a practical tool that is based on this concept. So the topic, this comes from the title and the idea here. The analogy from psychologist Dr. Rick Hansen, who says, it's like having a brain that's Velcro for the bad, but Teflon for the good. And so students are learning about this, this concept and understanding their brain's negativity bias. And we suggest that this could be previewed at the beginning of an activity about climate change or ahead of time, kind of introducing it to students. And then circling back at the completion, at the end of the lesson or at the end of the sequence, where students can practice applying this technique towards the climate emotions. And also want to point out that throughout all of these activities, the tools that the students are learning really can be used even beyond this class that they learn it in, but throughout their when they go into high school and continue learning about climate change, when they go beyond, when they're outside of the school setting, or even encountering negative emotions in completely unrelated contexts. So it's building their skills and resiliency kind of generally. But a little more here that you'll see is included in this activity is the Climate Emotions Wheel, which I'll show you an image of. The Climate Emotions Wheel is a resource from the Climate Mental Health Network that is a wonderful resource to use in many settings. It's available in over 30 languages. There's an emoji version as well. And research suggests that simply recognizing and labeling a negative emotion, such as anxiety or fear, can reduce its intensity. So the Climate Emotions Wheel is a tool that can be used to help identify and bring awareness to one's emotions as the first step to coping with them effectively. And included here and in the handout for students are some examples of positive climate emotions. And these are ones that, again, given the brain's negativity bias, they're going to need to spend some extra time and intentional effort at cultivating. So these are things like interest, empowerment, inspiration, empathy, gratitude, and hope. And so what the exercise is students are asked to go through and practice naming one negative emotion or thought that they had experienced when learning about climate change. And on their handout, this is a table, so they're writing about this on the left side, or doodling or drawing about it. And then on the right side, listing and describing 5 positive emotions or thoughts that they can think about that relate to the earth, climate, and the work people are doing to make the world a better place. So this is, the handout for them includes approachable graphics. The table has plenty of space for them to write. And then the final piece of this activity is we encourage the class to turn and talk about this exercise and to reflect on what the process was like for them. So adaptable in many settings, can be done pretty quickly where it fits. So this is one example. We don't have time to dive into all 10 tonight, but you'll have a chance to take a look yourself. So with that, I'll go ahead and share how you can access this toolkit. There's a QR code here on the screen, and then you'll be getting a link in the chat where you can download this toolkit right now for free. And this link itself is going to be available for the next few days. After 48 hours, we will have these for free on both the NEEF and Climate Mental Health Network websites with a form to fill out. So you can go ahead and grab this now and download, and you'll see the educator guide, the meditations and student activities, as well as the reports from phase 1 of this research and the pilot. Some next steps that we want to share with you. So moving forward, we plan to continue sharing these resources throughout the country and launching these. We have interest in adapting these resources for other grade levels. We have plans to help school districts and teachers adopt and distribute these resources. Please stay tuned this spring. We are launching an original music video created in collaboration with Hip Hop Public Health as an additional resource to support meaningful discussions around this toolkit. So you can sign up for updates using the link that was shared or the QR codes on the screen from both Climate Mental Health Network and from NEEF. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Elisa for the Q&A.
Thanks, Megan. Yeah, we got a lot of really interesting questions in the chat. So Megan, I'm going to pose the first question to you, which is, how can we discuss climate change in ways that encourage action rather than despair?
That is a great question. And there's a couple pieces here. I think the first one is awareness. So even thinking about that question is really a great first step, is being aware of how anyone, a student, a young person is learning about climate change and being mindful of that. So already that's a great start. But building further on that, there are, in addition to the approaches that we talked about this evening, there are many more of these kind of practical skills and strategies and concepts introduced in the toolkit. So one example of these that we think could be really useful for teachers to keep in mind is the window of tolerance. And this is a concept that describes the optimal emotional zone where intense emotions can be processed in a healthy way. So someone who's in this optimal zone can function, react to stress and anxiety effectively. But beyond that zone, the students may be feeling on one side overwhelmed, anxiety, anger, or on the other side, shut down, passive, and frozen. As opposed to, again, in that optimal zone, they'll feel the most grounded and flexible and able to self-regulate. So this is a concept, another one that's introduced and described throughout the educator guide, where when teachers have that awareness, they can be helping their students check in with themselves on how they're doing. They can be keeping in mind the ratio of good news to bad news, that's the right ratio for their students. They can emphasize the positive climate stories and solutions. And they can also, ask their students and encourage them, what can we do in our community? And start that conversation of what would a service project look like, or, what's something we can take action on. So lots of strategies there, and really the intention here that we're hoping to help address that need.
Thanks, Megan. All I can say is I wish I had gotten this kind of education about climate change when I was younger. So we have another question. How does this project and toolkit define resiliency? Larissa, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can jump in. I don't know that we really had a formal definition, but I will say that there are multiple definitions in literature for resilience, and one that we certainly that it's about kind of bouncing back or going back to baseline functioning. I would never expect that, I'm in Los Angeles and we just had the LA fires here, where 12 schools burned down and many, many adults and students and people of all ages were affected. And you just can't, expect, it's not realistic to expect that people are going to be unchanged by those experiences. And kind of bounce back to some sort of baseline functioning to go back to where they were before. So instead, our concept of resilience in the positive psychology movement, that's really more about a capacity challenging circumstances and to be able to, kind of experience negative emotions without being taken down by them, without them, be able to bend, not break. That sort of concept of, that negative emotions aren't, bad in and of themselves, that those are a normal part of the human experience, but being able to experience them and not necessarily be stuck in them, stuck in rumination. We say healthy feelings are ones that flow. So the ability to kind of experience them and move on, or, also still experience positive emotions and enjoy your life in spite of the challenges that we're all facing, is a kind of underlying, although it may not have been explicitly defined in our study or in the pilot, that's kind of the underlying thinking that went into the work.
Megan, do you have any other anything else to share as you guys were creating the resources about this concept of emotional resilience for middle school age students?
I think, Larissa, that concept, I completely agree. So we're just trying to use that. So not too much to add, but I can share, that in the resources, we were thinking about what the classroom setting is like, and being aware and helping teachers think about the direct and indirect impacts of climate change, and trying to think about tools that help both the teachers and the students, as well as, together in their classroom community and in their school community. So trying to make that concept and bring it to life with practical, adaptable, flexible tools, was the goal.
Thank you. I'm looking for one question and I can't seem to find it. So in the meantime, as I look for that one, I wanted to emphasize, somebody asked in the chat about how to access these resources and if they're free. And yes, these resources are free to use. So what is included in the toolkit, and how can it be applied in different kind of educational settings if it's not an only formal K-12 classroom?
Yeah, this is a great question. And while we piloted the resources in formal educational settings, so these were piloted again with public middle schools across the country, we also really see that they could be used in many other settings. So, this could be in informal educational settings, by school counselors or parents. We're hoping that administrators also, see these and share them with their communities. So, that's a really great question. And again, although it wasn't piloted in those, we really do see that because they're flexible and adaptable and ready to use, that we hope that any audience who finds these useful uses them and help support young people in navigating and addressing their climate emotions.
I'll jump in here as well. I think that these activities would be really appropriate for youth groups that meet, extracurricular. So I found the question I was looking for. So the question is, I'm curious if in your initial research, whether those teachers who were worried that climate change lessons would impact their own and student mental health avoided teaching about climate altogether. Also, did you investigate how those concerns compared with other hindrances that teachers have cited in other research, such as worry about lack of administrator pushback, lack of scientific understanding / training? So this question can be for Larissa and Megan.
I think it's a really interesting question. I find it easier to answer the second part first, because I don't know that we actually really heard a lot about, I don't know that we actually heard a lot in the research about people avoiding teaching climate altogether due to their concerns about it. I have heard anecdotally that people are, there's definitely sort of anxiety around teaching. I don't know that it's really that we've heard in the research that they really have avoided teaching it altogether. But I could see that could definitely come up for people. I do think that, we did ask them about barriers to teaching about climate change. And we did see a lot of kind of talk about barriers came up, especially in our focus groups. People talked about kind of individual level barriers like lack of knowledge and understanding about climate change, feeling like they're not equipped to teach about it, or feeling like there's too many other things to cover. Interpersonal level barriers like you were saying, like parent concerns about parent pushback. Fearing administrative pushback. A teacher talked about like a co-teacher or an aide not believing in climate change. And so, that kind of coming up for them. And then also institutional and policy level barriers like lack of flexibility in state standards or state testing priorities. So we definitely heard a lot about barriers, but we didn't compare in a quantitative way whether the worries about how climate education would impact, could give rise to concerns or worry in students, how that compared with these other kinds of concerns or barriers. So we didn't, those were kind of came out in the qualitative research that we did in the focus group. So there wasn't really an exact comparison, but it was certainly, there was certainly a lot of talk about barriers. And anyone else should feel free to, I know Megan and Sarah B were also part of this, so please feel free to chime in.
Yeah, I think I'll just add there that, it's a really interesting question. And I think even like the question is as asking the first part, if they had shared if they were avoiding teaching climate altogether because of worries about how it would impact their mental health, both themselves and their students, that piece of it. Very, very interesting, but also, part of what was uncovered in research, the phase 1 and also other studies is there's the indirect impacts about teaching climate change in the classroom, but then there's the direct impacts. And we were hearing the teachers share that their communities were experiencing, these different weather events and their students were experiencing them. And so the climate emotions are there, and so, whether or not that avoidance is happening of the teaching about the topic, there is that need still to address and help them understand what's going on. And then also, what's your reaction to it? And let's help us all cope and get through that together.
So yeah, thank you. The next question is, generally speaking, how can we support teachers in navigating emotional learning overall in the classroom, especially when it comes to this issue of climate change?
can start with this one and share that, you know, it's a need that an opportunity that is there. And so I think through resources, you know, as one of the pieces, and that's something that we're addressing here, but also, you know, generally speaking, through professional development, through having these topics be in teacher preparation programs, because teachers are situated to be a person, a trusted adult for their students to go to, and will encounter this. And so I think, you know, helping equip them with the strategies and the tools and the resources so that they do feel ready when that, you know, when that opportunity arises.
We have another question here about action, and quite a few of the toolkit activities deal with this idea of youth engaging in action. And this person wants to know, what are a good suite of climate actions that are appropriate for this age group of youth?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not going to get the number right, but one of the activities, I think it's toward the end, is circles of action. And is an interesting one where students kind of go through thinking about what actions they can take at various levels of influence. But another one that I think we reference in the toolkit that's a really great resource is Project Drawdown. And there's a library of solutions where it'd be a great starting place to look at as a class together. And it goes through different, what's the word I'm looking for, like categories of types of solutions. And so students could learn about, you know, if our city had, you know, if we all used more bikes commuting to school, you know, things like that. There's a great library. So that's a good one. And then several of the activities kind of incorporate it's like a launching place, but it's also a good question to engage in as a class and think about, you know, what's a need in our school, you know, and having students help brainstorm and kind of come up with those projects together.
Yeah, I'll just add that Project Drawdown, or echo Megan's sentiment that Project Drawdown is a great resource, and their library of solutions is sortable by the level of impact that those solutions have. So you can sort and see, and there it can be really eye-opening for young people and adults alike, that some of the top solutions that are actually the most impactful are things that everyone can do and are kind of low-hanging fruit. Like, for example, reducing food waste is one of the top 3, I think, most impactful solutions above and beyond these like high-tech solutions and, you know, hydroplanes and things like that, just reducing food waste. And so I think, you know, that's a really one that kids love food. Food is the center of many children's life, including my daughter's life. And so, you know, it's something that's very personal and doable. And I know that my daughter has a youth-based climate action group, and they focused on starting a composting program at their school, and to reduce food waste from school lunches, and to implement a composting system for food waste. And it's been a great way for them to like do something that actually can make a real impact, that is, you know, impactful, and not like just changing a light bulb or something that feels, you know, it's just an action that feels like it can really, it's community based. And I think that that's another point, that the research shows that collective action, that doing action with other people, is actually more protective for mental health versus individual action. So things that kids can do with other kids and with adults so that they feel supported by adults. Because also, to pull on previous research, has shown that kids often feel isolated in their concerns and unsupported by the adults in their lives. So doing action that connects them with other kids and with adults who are there to support them and help foster that level of connection, I think can really work on multiple levels to support their mental
Thanks. I also just want to jump in here because one of the teachers in one of the audio clips that we heard earlier was talking about how students have relate to nature differently, have different relationships with nature. And for some, that might be the first place to begin as action is working on your relationship with nature, which is something that a teacher can use the resources in this toolkit to help guide them in. Okay, so another question. Did the teachers receive any in-person training or just through the educator guide? So, folks can talk a little bit more about how, maybe Larissa, how we engage the teachers in the pilot.
Yeah, there really wasn't a lot of training, and the reason was that we wanted this to be scalable and so that the resources could stand on their own. So we wanted to kind of test how they could do really on their own. We did have an orientation meeting where we kind of introduced the teachers to what we were doing and told them where to find the resources and things like that. We had a kind of learning management system where everything was in one place. And so there was some sort of orientation, and through that, there was also a bit of teachers connecting with one another, which was nice. So there was a little bit of kind of, support and, well, I would just say support, but there wasn't really training to use the resources. We did have optional office hours, 2 sessions throughout the pilot where teachers could come and pop in and ask us questions if they had questions about how to use the resources. I will say that, we had a few teachers come. It wasn't, it wasn't a huge part of the pilot, I would say. Other people can chime in, but to me, it felt like most of the training came from the guide itself, which I think is a good thing because it means that those resources can stand alone and people can feel confident in using them without specialized training. I do think that, training could be a beneficial aspect and can only help, but I don't, in our pilot, there wasn't extensive training at all. Would you guys agree with that assessment? Yeah.
And so the last question I'll pose to Megan is about the arts activities. Did the activities include music? And can you talk a little bit more about the importance of including an art-based activity in the toolkit?
Yes, so the art-based activity, it could, but so the way it's designed is it's a thinking routine called, let's see if I get it right here, see, me, think, we, some combination of those. But it's a thinking routine that the students will look at a piece of climate change related art, and we provide a website that has a starting place for students and teachers to go, but we say you could use something else. You could have students make something and have it be the basis for this thinking routine, or it could be, I think one of the teachers in the pilot had a local art exhibit that they were able to have their students access. So we provide an example where students can pick art pieces from, but it could be anything. And so it could be music. And having them kind of think through that piece of art through the lens of this thinking routine and making connections to the global community. So that art-based one also, could be extended into, again, the doing art and having students experience thinking through their climate emotions in that way, in a really expressive way. But I will just preview again that we do have a music video coming, an original music track coming this spring in collaboration with Hip Hop Public Health around this topic. And so stay tuned. By the end of the spring, that'll be available and freely for use, and will be a really great complement to the toolkit, to that art activity, to many of the others, in a way that students can think and connect to not even think, but connect to these topics in a different way, with music.
Thank you so much, Megan. All right, at this point, that's going to conclude our Q&A section. Thank you all for those really wonderful and insightful questions. And now we'll move on to our closing. All right, so thank you to all the participants for this multi-year research pilot. This project was funded by the Robert H.N. Poe Family Foundation Global with additional support for Blue Shield of California, and we're so grateful for their support. Thank you to all the panelists, Larissa, Sarah, Megan, thank you so much. Everybody here will receive follow-up emails with the recording of this webinar, and the direct download links that we shared in the chat this evening will be available for 48 hours. But as we mentioned earlier, you can still visit the NEEF and Climate Mental Health Network website to download the student activities, the toolkit guide for educators, the research report, and the pilot report, all for free. Lastly, please fill out the feedback survey that will appear after you close this Zoom window. And finally, thank you so much for joining us today, and we really hope that you enjoy and use these resources with your students. So have a great night, everybody.